here at the top, I've got two representations of essentially the black hole format, the Schwarzschild's radius, into which there is an event horizon, and that leads down into the singularity at the bottom, beyond which we've no idea what happens next. The laws of physics break down as far as we're aware, because there is no explanation or real way of actually determining what happens beyond the singularity itself. However, in this example here, you've got the same Schwarzschild's radius and the singularity point at the centre, and then the other side of the equation. Now that's been mooted to be various things, white holes for instance at the other side of the wormhole. So you've got a black hole on one side and a white hole on the other, which is of course a version of duality. There's one illustration of singularity and duality potentially at work. This area that represents essentially the solar system in a toroidal format, which seems to be quite a prevalent framework on which to structure things in the way that we describe them, from the micro, the quantum mechanical field, over to the macro, of which this is an example. In time terms, the time invariant of past and future circling in waves to become the present is also illustrated in a toroidal format. So therein lies again this duality that partakes in the system of creating a singularity. This here is the Schumann Resonance illustrated in the three different wave formats that the Schumann Resonance seems to operate within, around the sphere of the planet. So the planet itself emanates this Schumann Resonance, not quite sure where from or what its origination is, but we do know that it exists. So could the planet itself be described as a singularity? At the core of our planet, it's been determined that the most likely thing to be sitting there is a diamond, condensed carbon, in other words. We are said to be carbon units. Star Trek famously dubbed us as carbon units, and it's true enough, wouldn't it? Because if we exist on a carbon-based planet, then as carbon-based life forms, that's what we are. These two are, again, illustrations of a singular and a dual. So the singular format, a sphere, has been used in illustrations of symmetry. It's the most popular of the illustrations of symmetry that you'll find in physics terms, because it's very easy to identify with the sphere as being symmetrical. It doesn't matter which way you roll it, doesn't matter what position it's in, it's going to look the same. So as an example of symmetry, it's a ready meal, it's easy to use. On the other side, I've given the yin-yang representation of the sphere, which has obviously dual parts. There are two parts to the whole system. And again, in physics terms, you will find very often that there is a duality to the system, whether it comes down to particles or principles. This duality system seems to operate. Now, you might well have heard the term as above, so below. It's definitely a term that's familiar to people within various spiritual fields. But in the context of physics, we're looking really at the same kind of thing. We're looking essentially at the ability of the quantum world, the micro, to be somehow correlated to the macro world, the cosmos. In there is a paradox, because it seems that the quantum world behaves in a very wizardly sort of fashion, not at all like the ordered universal systems that we observe with our various pieces of high-tech equipment. But nevertheless, there is in there somewhere a duality that operates to create the reality that we experience. Which is why I've put this illustration as the last one on this series of 3, because this is our own electromagnetic field, the EM field that emanates from the heart. And it stands to reason, with regards to our own experience of life, that this EM field has some correlation with our mood, our sense of self. When we're down and we're low, it's very difficult for people around us generally to get in there and communicate, unless they're professionals or very close to us. I mean, obviously there are exceptions to that rule. But in general terms, when people encounter somebody who's down, feeling negative, they'll tend to sort of steer clear and not be sure what to do. They're reluctant to engage. There's a resistance there. Correspondingly, when we're feeling great and we're very happy and our positivity is high, then people are attracted to that and they want to partake of it. You know, we want to be in good company, and so therefore, if we're in good company, that means that the feeling is positive. The energy field that we are emanating therefore must be correspondingly attractive. So could we be said to be singularities within ourselves, the core essence of ourselves? Could that be said to be a singularity of sorts? Because beyond the centre of our very selves, where consciousness and all those EM fields and various permutations of who we are emanating from, has to have a point of origin. Is that a singularity in its own right? Well, this little line might not look like anything in particular, but essentially that was the starting point for a positivity and productivity program that I ran at Chorus Steel in 2004. And that course went on to break records for the participants, but when we first started it, I asked them where they felt they were on this line between positive and negative. And at the start of the course, most of the people said that they were budging towards the negative end of the scale. That's how they felt at that time. But by the end of the course, asked the same question, and they moved towards the positive end of the spectrum in terms of their self-identity. So there's one example of our own correlation. Of course, positive and negative are dualities in their own right. You can't have one without the other. And so therefore there is a symbiosis between them. And one of the episodes in the series is on complementarity, which is where we visit this kind of dual symbiosis versus paradox in more depth. Here we've got a representation of wave-particle duality. Here's your particle, being a bit fuzzy as particles tend to be, and it's turning into waves, probably on its way to a double slit experiment where those waves will go through and correspondingly appear on the interference board at the back to prove that particles in fact are waves in certain experimental situations. And probably the rest of the time as well. So this all relates back down to topics that we've covered in Series 1. You've seen this diagram represented there when we were talking about neutrinos and quarks, because quarks and neutrinos are particularly well known for changing their flavour, changing their mass, changing their identity even as they go along. In the quark field, that happens in a sedentary fashion, as we've discussed. In the neutrino field, however, it happens during oscillation, during movement of the neutrino as it flies. So here you've got an illustration of that. The neutrino is one particular type. Let's say it's a muon neutrino when it's here, and then a couple of oscillations later it turns into an electron neutrino or even a tau neutrino, which is a very different mass to the muon where it started. Now, oscillation isn't something that we can see happening. It's not observed as such. The only way that we know that oscillation happens is by identifying neutrinos being of different types during the experiments conducted. This wiggly sequence of lines here is a kind of a representation of waveforms that you will find in scientific papers, being very different to each other, but following the similarities in frequency, but nevertheless being different from each other. It's very common to find that when you're looking at terms of expression in identifying the data for how particles behave and how various field systems behave. That's really where I want to conclude this particular exploration, with the question of how do these field systems come together and complement each other. These are the paradoxes and principles that are of exploration during Series 2. You can find us on Facebook, find us on Twitter, and the websites are out there as well to have a look at if you want to. Buy the book! The book is the bridge to cross the quantum world with the human experience. So, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoy this exploration, and that we continue to discuss these things in more depth and find out where it's going and where it may lead us. And see you again next time. Take care. Bye.